believe that you can and you can. That is not a mere play on words. That is one of the greatest psychological facts known to the human race. It is also one of the greatest of all spiritual teachings, and spiritual teachings are never predicated on fantasy, always on the truth. So if there's something you want to do and you can't do it, your belief isn't strong enough. You've got to believe in depth. Believe that you can and you can. Now, the first time I ever heard that was when I was in the 5th grade in school, which really isn't all that long ago. I grew up in Cincinnati on the banks of the Ohio River. And my teacher in the 5th grade was a man named George Reeves. He weighed, according to my researches, 240 pounds. Great, huge man. And he stood 6'4". He was a member of my father's church. He was a great Christian and an equally great teacher. And he had a frown on his face to cover up a big, gentle heart. Occasionally in school, for no reason apparently whatsoever, he would go over to the blackboard and he would write the word C-A-N'-T. Then he would dust his hands off with the chalk, and he would walk around a while and he'd say, "Look at that!" We all looked. When he said to look, you looked, and no fooling. Then he said, "What shall I do now?" We knew what he wanted, and we chanted back, "Knock the T off the cant." With a sweeping gesture, he would erase the T and the apostrophe, leaving the big word "can" standing out there clear and distinct. And he would say, "Let that be a lesson to you. Believe that you can and you can." And then he would recite a passage of Scripture. Of course, that'd be against the Supreme Court now. But he did it in a day when we had full religious freedom in this country. He said, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." Now, from the standpoint of modern pedagogy, you may think that is overly simplistic, but what is the purpose of pedagogy? To get an idea in the mind of a student that'll hang on there with him throughout life. And I remembered it all those years. Believe that you can, and you can. That's a great message of the Bible. According to your faith, it shall be done unto you. As you have believed, so shall it be. Now that is a basic, fundamental lesson. So if you're going through life now not believing that you can, you're not living up to your full potential. When people come into church on Sunday, we try to remind them who they are. Who are you anyway? You're a child of God, created in God's own image, in His likeness, and given dominion over things. We're not pygmies. We're giants. and we should act and live like giants. Now, of course, when you believe that you can, you create the power of your inner resources into a situation. A friend of mine is a minister over in Jersey at Wyckoff. Donner Atwood's his name, and he and I are fellow athletic fans. He sent me an illustration which he thought I could use, and how right he is. The Boston Marathon was run only a few weeks ago, and the man who won it was Alberto Salazar. He came in first, but he didn't get the publicity. The man who came in 985th, he got the publicity. Why? His name was Guy Gertsch, Gertsch, I guess that's the way to pronounce it. You know, the marathon is 26 miles. At the 7th mile post, Guy felt a terrible pain in his leg. And for a moment, it threw him off his pace, and he had to decide whether to continue. He ran the succeeding 19 miles, and when he crossed the finish line, his legs gave out from under him, and he collapsed and became unconscious. They immediately took him to the hospital, where he regained consciousness. They took x-rays of his leg and came up with the conclusion that when he had that pain at the 7th milestone, he had broken his leg. And he ran 19 miles on a broken leg. Now, how could he do it? The doctor said first he was in the peak of physical condition. And he had a clean, disciplined mind. And as later was ascertained, a deep personal faith. What happened? Your body always wants to help you. So the muscles formed what was similar to a cast around the broken leg. You see what resources you have. Even your muscles will work with you if you think right and if you believe right. And when finally he crossed the finish line, the muscles, which presumably were getting tired, relaxed, and his legs gave out beneath him. Now, you see, you and I are in a race, the race of life, up hills and down into dark valleys. And sometimes we believe that we can't make it. But we've got a mechanism called faith in Jesus Christ. This, I believe, actually builds a cast around our purposes and gives us a supportive power. So when you believe that you can't, build your faith stronger. Learn to believe. Don't believe intellectually, believe deeply, emotionally, in a dedicated fashion. And even as physical muscles took care of that man in that grueling race, the faith muscles will see you through in a race of this life. Now, I have a letter here from a young lady who lives in Arizona. I don't know her. I never saw her. Never heard of her before. She says, about 2 years ago, an exciting idea or goal came to me. It was an idea of something to accomplish with my life. Along with the idea came a sense of peace. It was like finding the missing piece to a puzzle that you've worked on all your life. Suddenly, with this idea, everything fit. However, the financial costs connected with the idea seemed too large to overcome, so the idea was pushed to the back of my head. I couldn't do it. The nice thing about God, though, is if he gives you an idea, he somehow keeps bringing it up all the time. Every time I turned around, the idea was there, or haunting me. Whenever the idea came up, I would pray and ask God if it's what he really wanted me to do, and each time my answer would be yes. My problem was that after I got my answer, I kept coming up with but. I never trusted God to show the way and to provide the financial means. The fact is, I never asked God to show me how. I just logically figured it was impossible. Somewhere I forgot that God is bigger than finance or any other impossibility. She's a smart girl. Anyway, a few months ago, a friend loaned me your book, The Power of Positive Thinking. All through the book, things kept jumping out at me. By the time I reached chapter 13, I was almost sure you were pointing a finger at me, especially with one sentence. And this is a sentence. It is as simple as this. Put your problem in God's hands, believe you can, and you can. So, I've done just that. My idea is in process of being completed. Thanks for giving me the trust in God. Why he chose me for this project, I'm not sure, but I'm thankful now that he did. Well, maybe one day we'll meet, and I'll tell you how God and I accomplished my idea. Now, what her idea is, I haven't the slightest notion. But here's a nice young girl, I presume she's young, who didn't really believe in herself. I wonder how many people in this congregation don't really believe in themselves. If you've been coming here for very long, you believe in yourself, because we've been constantly reminding you who you are. But she learned to believe in herself. She put the problem in God's hands. She believed that she could, and she could. Now, you know, if you have a low opinion of yourself, that's a sad situation. You are greater than you think you are. If you really get converted, you have a normal concept of yourself, and you can do wonderful things. This is not theoretical. I've been working at this for a long time, and I've seen the results in thousands of people. For example, I was reading the other night one of my own books. You can see to what desperate straits I was reduced. I was looking for something, and I came across a story that I have in one of those books about a friend of mine whom I dearly loved. He's deceased now. Still love him. His name was Paul Soupicet, S-O-U-P-I-S-E-T, French, I suppose. He ran a ladies' ready-to-wear shop, I think they call it, in Houston, Texas. But he didn't think his life was amounting to anything. He had a great urge to do something great in the world. And since he didn't get to do it, he resorted to alcohol, and especially on Saturday night, he would go on a drunk. And Sunday morning, he'd send his wife and children to Sunday school while he slept it off. And one night, he always listened to my radio talks. They came in there sometime Sunday morning. And in one of these talks, he says, I said, don't lie there not believing in yourself. Get up and get with it and be what God intended you to be. Now, whether I ever said that or not, I don't really know, but that's what he said. That's what he heard. So he got out of bed, knelt down by the bed, gave himself to God. Shortly after that, they moved him over to San Antonio and gave him a bigger shop. But still he was dissatisfied. And one day, walking through the little village of La Valida in San Antonio, he saw an empty church, an old German Methodist church. And he found out who the authorities were, and he went to them and told them that he was a Methodist, though not German, and could he use this church to talk to the poor, the underprivileged of San Antonio. And they gave it to him. And it was filled up with people of all kinds. White people, black people, poor peons, the Mexicans with which the city's filled. He had them all there. And gradually, people of more affluence started coming to his church, because all he did for them was to remind them who and what they could be through Christ. And he always seemed to have a kind of a feeling of gratitude to me. He said that I was the agent of his conversion. And so he raised some money and he put some bells in the steeple of the church, Carillon bells. And he put a plaque on the side of the building dedicating these bells to me. And then he wrote me and told me he'd done this, and he insisted that I come down there for the dedication of the bells, free of charge. So I'd never had any bells dedicated to me before. And I had a vision of them pealing out the watchword all over the city. So I went down and helped him dedicate the bells. Gave a talk. Then the ceremony of dedication came along, and a big hulking fellow got up to dedicate the bells. And my friend Paul leaned over to me and he said, he's an ex-drunk. And he said this is the first time he ever appeared in public in his life. And he said he's scared to death. I could see he was. His knees were shaking like an aspen leaf. And he got up and he grunted a couple of times. And then he said, friends and fellow citizens, we hereby dedicate these bells to the glory of God and in memory of Norman Vincent Peale. I had to remind him I wasn't dead yet. Then Paul told anybody who wanted their lives to be better to come forward and kneel down at the altar. That's the old-fashioned way the Methodists used to do it. And he had room there for about 40. 40 people knelt down and some stood up, couldn't find a place to kneel down. And there was a little Mexican man, and he said to him, amigo, do you want Jesus? Si, senor, I want Jesus. He put his hand on his head, he says, receive Jesus. And then there was a little girl, sweet little thing. And he said to her, honey, do you love Jesus? She says, yes, Mr. Paul, I love Jesus. And then there was a beautiful elderly woman with white hair, exquisitely clothed, obviously of high society. She had her hands clasped. And he says to her, Mama, do you want Jesus? And she said, oh, yes, Mr. Paul. I've lived a sinful life. I can't bear what my life is. Help me find him. And he went over and he took his two hands and put them on her white head. And he says, as they do down south, honey, receive Jesus. And the tears were streaming down her cheeks. And they were streaming down the cheeks of this Mexican man. And they were streaming down Paul's cheeks. And they were streaming down my cheeks. What Jesus Christ can do with a human being. It's astonishing. It's spectacular. It's incredible. It's the greatest miracle in the world, bar none. And about 4 years later, I went back to San Antonio. The city of San Antonio gave a great tribute to Paul's super save. It was held outdoors in front of the city hall or in a park. They said there were 5,000 or 10,000 people present. The mayor was there. All the ministers were there, Catholic and Protestant and Jewish. The governor was there, paying tribute to a ladies' ready-to-wear salesman who had become one of the most creative citizens of a great historic American city. And the one text that describes it all is from Philippians 4:13. I can do all things. That doesn't say something. I can do a few things. I can do all things through Jesus Christ, who gives me the strength. Now, what is bothering you? What has you down? What has got you frustrated? Why are you discouraged? Why do you believe that you haven't got it in you? Who are you to tell you that you haven't got it in you? Who put it in you in the first place? You didn't put it in you. You had nothing to do with it except to develop it. He put it into you. And he put dreams into you, and hopes, and aspirations, and longings. They're all in there, making that marvelous being called you or me. But the trouble is, we play ourselves down. We say you don't amount to anything. You haven't got anything on the ball. You've got a big problem and you can't handle it. That's the way we talk to ourselves. Now, you go out of this church this morning walking tall. That's it, walk tall up this avenue or wherever, and say to yourself, I can do all things through Christ. Believe that you can, and you can.
For your convenience, please advance the tape to the end. It will then be ready for you to hear the other side.